Okay, so I'm going to give you a report on the Assess Initiative and primarily about the Assess Congress that we had in January. We had 85 people attend, and that was in spite of the worst snowstorm that Washington, D.C. has seen in at least 20 years. And several of us spent a long time in that hotel until Monday morning. Okay, so what is Assess? Assess stands for Analysis, Simulation, and System Engineering Software Strategies. It's a mouthful. Assess is an easier way to describe it. Okay, but that's a name, that's an acronym. What is it really? It's a broad-reaching, multi-industry initiative to expand the use and benefit of software tools for model-based analysis, simulation, and systems engineering in the engineering applications domain. One of the things we did at Assess Congress was refine so it's only for the engineering applications domain. We will be paying attention to what other people do with simulation, but only to learn from them. We're not trying to influence them. So the goal of Assess is actually to make a significant difference in how simulation is used, where it's used, how it benefits the users, how it benefits the vendors because they get to sell more of it, and how it benefits the users because they get to get more smart decisions earlier, be more competitive. So it's all about how do we bring this together to improve the whole usage of analysis, simulation, and systems engineering, and to understand the synergies between all those things. Okay, so the 85 attendees, despite the blizzard, here's a little bit of a breakdown for where they came. We actually had a few people from Asia, and we had a strong representation from Europe. We had a distribution, primarily vendors. We did have industry, analysts, users, government, nonprofit, and academic. We're looking for a stronger representation in end users. We'd like to see the vendor part become about as small as the others. And we want a very strong, so we're working on building the end user representation. We had several sponsors that we'll say thank you to again for the event. We had 3 platinum level sponsors and multiple foundation level sponsors. So what prompted Assess in the first place? What prompts Assess is that there's a changing role in how simulation's used today and where it will be used and what are the drivers. Simulation, systems engineering, analysis all started out as saying, okay, we got a problem, how do we fix it, how do we understand it? It all started as failure analysis. Then it moved to design validation. From there it moved to design decision support. How do we prevent this from happening? How do we prevent a problem? To design drivers. Let's do pedo systems, multidisciplinary optimization, robust engineering. Let's actually drive this thing. To systems engineering to say, hold it, wait a minute, let's take the whole system into account and how does this drive everything and how do we then drive all the analysis from there and the complexity of systems. But what's changing now is there's a whole world of business drivers. This comes about due to the increased competitiveness that's required to compete in today's markets. So the business value drivers are pushing a broader demand for the use of simulation. And actually, they're pushing a broader demand for the benefit of simulation, not necessarily the use, but they're pushing to get things done faster, do more simulations faster to make decisions get to market faster. But the challenge is that simulation is still done primarily by specialists. So although there's a demand curve that we can see that is a classical S curve that we're expecting, the actual growth curve is much slower, and that's basically because it's tempered by the expertise that's required to do this. So Assess is about how do we address this untapped potential? How do we make it so that we actually spread the use and benefit of these technologies to a broader audience and more use within the existing audience? How do we make it more pervasive so it influences more aspects of product design, engineering processes? So the demand is not going away because the competitive pressures of the world economy are just going to increase that demand. It's not going to go away. So basically, we're going to be forced to come up with a revolution and a new approach. And Assess is saying the whole emphasis is let's embrace the revolution, let's enable the revolution rather than trying to resist it. So there may be a delay in the curve, but we want to build that curve. Okay, so the first day at the Assess Congress. The first session on Assess was in January of 2005, was the Assess Summit. We had the Assess Congress in Washington, D.C. in January. This started with 3 keynote presentations, one from Jesse Citizen from the Defense M&S perspective. So what is the Defense Department doing related to modeling and simulation? Roger Burkhart from John Deere gave us a presentation about the challenges of collaboration through shared models. And what does it take to really share models? What does it take to really collaborate about simulations across different disciplines to make decisions? And Zach Ekblad from Intel told us about how they're democratizing structural analysis through metacode and web apps. We then had 2 rounds of technical briefings, where the first round of technical briefings was intended, everyone was told to go to a session about a topic they did not know about. So it was about a learning session. Secondly, we had a round which is intended to go to what you did know about so you could actually get an agreement on the state of the art. So what we're going to do is review the key drivers for assess. And this is what after we finished the technical briefing, we brought everybody back to review these key drivers. So the key drivers as to why assess is of interest to everybody in this room, to the people at the Assess Initiative, and to many more people are these 7 items. There's a key demand in the industry of trying to figure out how can I be more competitive. There's exponentially growing complexity in systems and products. There's, as John showed us, the compute power is expanding rapidly, so we actually have the compute power to break through the bottlenecks. We no longer have a compute limit. Now we have a whole new world, as Andreas will show us later, of 3D printed objects, which is 3D printed objects, 3D printed processes, 3D printed optimizations. There's whole new aspects opening up. The other thing that's happening is there's entirely new applications that are creating rapidly growing demand for breakthroughs. Things like artificial limbs, artificial hearts, biomechanical. Oil and gas is actually driving several things in these areas where simulation has not heavily been used in the past. So they're actually they're forcing us to think about different ways to use simulation. The other key driver is up until now, simulation is used almost exclusively by a limited number of experts. We're trying to change that. We're trying to change several things, trying to meet these other demands. The other thing that's clear is the efforts have 3 key but disjointed vectors: commercial activities, government activities, and research activities. All 3 doing excellent, marvelous things. Somewhere in the mid-'80s, they all got disconnected. And the wheel is being reinvented over and over again, and amazing stuff is being done by the government that the commercial doesn't take into account. The government's spending billions of dollars on something that costs $100,000, and the research is reinventing technologies that's shipping every day as PhDs. We have a total disconnect when it comes to this field. And part of it is because this field is so dynamic. Okay, so what we did then is we broke into 7 working groups to focus on themes. We came up with 7 different themes. One was democratizing stasis, and that's a typo there, which Monica Schnitger and Karl-Heinz Peters led the team. Then we also had one about stasis confidence, which Keith Mencius led, and we had one about business challenges, which Mark Halpern led. And we had about the intersection of systems modeling and classical simulation, which was led by Don Toll. We had one about aligning commercial, government, and research interests and efforts, the 3 separate vectors that Dennis Nagy led. We had one about potential game changers, which Andreas volunteered to lead. And we had one about looking forward, which was with Jack Ring and Bruce Jenkins. These were 3-hour sessions of people committed to these areas. They went the rest of the day for that 3-hour session, and their goal was to provide to us the major issues and recommendations and next steps. So the second day, we started with one keynote presentation from Rod Dreisbeck, formerly with Boeing, about evolution, revolution, and the next new generation of engineering simulation. He had 2 interesting comments. One comment was, the first generation of simulation's over and it's time for a new first generation. He didn't call it a second generation. He called it a new first generation because it's a whole different way of looking at simulation. And so he called that forward, and he had an extremely strong call for a unified vision to convert what we currently do to what he called assets, which is making all these technologies smarter.
Say the acronyms. Software tools for.
Stasis is software tools for analysis, systems engineering, and simulation. And assets is analysis, simulation, and systems engineering tools made smarter. Okay, so on day 2, the working groups had to nominate a presenter and give us a report on vision, goals and objectives, issues, priorities, and recommended next steps. So the assess working groups, we're going to go through those reports next, and I'm giving everybody time because I'm quicker than we need to be, which is fine. So we're going to be going through these in order. So the first one's going to be John Chauner is going to actually give us the presentation on democratizing software tools. Then Keith Mencius is going to give us a presentation on the report about stasis confidence. Mark Halpern was scheduled to give the report, but his flight was delayed by 3.5 hours, so Bob Deragish has been polite enough to step in his place, and he was in the group, so he can speak on these topics very well, about business challenges. Steve Coy from Time Like Systems is going to talk to us about the intersection of systems modeling and classical simulation. And I'm going to talk about the aligning of commercial, government, and research and what that discussion in that work group came up with. Andreas is going to talk about potential game changers, and anybody who knows Andreas knows it's the perfect topic for Andreas to talk about. And Chris Wilkes from Sigmetrics is going to talk about looking forward. So at this point in time, we're ready to move forward to these presentations.